Welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 211. 211. Why does that mean something? And we're going to talk about time travel. We will, I promise. It will make some sense. Just bear with me, please. We're also going to talk about the high amps drawn by diesel heaters at startup, a product review of a MagSafe car mount, and a tale from the road involving a lost mine. And it's still lost, and maybe you guys can find it, because I can't. Anyway, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. Once again, this episode is not what I had intended. I had something planned, and then something happened, and it made my brain go, and now my brain's going, and I can't do anything else, so this is what you are stuck with. This is what you're going to get. It's what my brain wants to do. Some might call it inspiration. Some might call it distraction. At any rate, while I was researching my tale from the road, which I will get to in time, I decided to look up some other stuff, and it sent me down this path. And so let me start here. We're all time travelers. We are. I mean, this isn't earth-shattering knowledge. We're all traveling through time, generally in one direction, and we may be perceiving that time at different speeds, but we are traveling through time. We are not in the same place, time-wise, that we were when you started this podcast, for example, or 10 years ago, or whatever. And that is something we should be aware of. In fact, we should be more aware of that, because we are all travelers, I'm assuming. People listening to this podcast generally have one thing in common above all other things, and that is that they travel. Maybe they don't do van life. Maybe they only travel vicariously, but at some level, everybody listening is involved in travel. And as I age, and I'm now 57, I am becoming more and more aware of time. This is nothing unusual. This is something that happens as you age, because you have more perspective on time. You have more memories, and you see change more clearly than you could when you were, say, 20, when your oldest memories were maybe 18 years old. Well, folks, I have 55-year-old memories. I am keenly aware now that when you visit a place, you are not only visiting a place, you are visiting a time. And while you can go back to the place, you can never go back to the place and time. And this is what is meant by the expression, you can never go home again. You can go to the address you used to live at. You can go to even some places that haven't changed very much. But they have. Somehow they've changed. Whether it be they've changed physically over time, whether there's trees in the area that are all different. Trees are a big one. You know, trees change. Trees do not stay the same. So any tree you saw 20 years ago isn't like that tree anymore. Or maybe it's just technology. You view things differently based on the technology you have. This is a little esoteric here, but if you have a smartphone, it affects the way you see everything, because suddenly, not so suddenly for young people, but for old people it seems sudden, we have the ability to record everything all the time. And that changes how we see things. Anyway, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but being concrete about this, in 1978, my parents decided to go to Peru. Now, 1978, for an American to go to Peru in 1978, that was a very unusual thing. There were something like only 7,000 Americans that went to Peru that year. They were having some civil uprisings. There was an organization called the Shining Path that was making threats. There was all kinds of stuff going on. But me, as a 10-year-old, I was unaware of any of this. All I knew was that we got on a chartered plane. TIA, I think, was the airline, whatever the heck that is. And it was a 707, to give you some idea how long ago this was. And we flew to Lima. And I learned a whole lot being a 10-year-old. And the things I learned were interesting. What sticks with me, I learned that they make hot dogs different in Lima. They actually cut them in half long ways and fry them on a grill. That was unusual to me. They use different toilet paper. The toilet paper they use had a waxy finish to it. And if you ask me, that's just wrong. that thing is wrong. I mean, we can talk about different cultures, but no, they got that wrong. And I learned that you can communicate with people without knowing their language. I, as a 10-year-old, was communicating with locals, going into stores, asking how much stuff was, bartering with them. I was doing all these things as a 10-year-old. It was a great experience. And I have not been back. I have not been to Peru since 1978. I've been to Ecuador, and I've been to Colombia and Argentina and other places in South America. But I've never been to Peru since then. And the truth is I can never go back. I can't go back to Peru of 50 years ago. It doesn't exist. None of it exists. I mean, okay, I went to Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is still there. But if I went there now, I'm not sure I would recognize it. They've rebuilt a whole bunch of it. The tourism there is incredible now. When I was there, it was just wide open. There were just a few people walking around. I mean, there were maybe a few hundred people there. It wasn't empty. But now there's a few thousand people there. It's crowded. You have to wait to take pictures. And of course, again, all the trees are different. And trees keep coming up for some reason. And that's because I look at a lot of old photos of places. I'm always looking at how places have changed. And trees are a huge thing in how places change. Where am I going with all this? Well, I became keenly aware of this traveling through time phenomenon today as I was researching this tale from the road, which involves a mine. We will get to that. But I was trying to find the mine. And, so I'm looking on maps. I know it's there. I've been there. And it's next to a Boy Scout camp I went to. And I thought, well, I'll start there. I mean, I know it's next to the Boy Scout camp. Now, I had no intention of looking up this Boy Scout camp. My history with Boy Scouts is complex. It's not something I'd necessarily want to reminisce about. But it was the logical way to try to go back and find this mine. And so I discovered a whole lot. The camp I was at doesn't really exist anymore. It was merged into another camp. The council, the large organization of Boy Scout troops, doesn't seem to exist anymore. And then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. And I turned on satellite view and actually looked at the camp from the air and discovered that most of the camp that I am so incredibly familiar with in my mind. I spent weeks and weeks and weeks there. I knew every rock and tree and everything. But it's all gone. It's gone because it was abandoned. Apparently, when they merged these camps together, the part that I spent the most time in was abandoned. It's been turned into something else. And Leech Beach, which I talked about a little while ago, apparently has a house on it now. It's not the beach it used to be. But then there were things that were still there. There's a little fishing dock by the nature area that's still there. I could see it in the satellite view. And the dining hall is still there. And so it all made me feel very uneasy. This place that I'm so intimately familiar with doesn't exist anymore, and yet it still does. And then the thing that really clinched it for me that I needed to talk about this, if only to get it out of my system. Well, backing up here. So I worked at this camp. I went to this camp as a camp counselor. I actually went to college to be a professional Boy Scout. My first foray into collegiate life was at Salem College in Salem, West Virginia, which has changed names many times. And I was in a program called Youth Agency Administration, which would basically train you to be a Boy Scout executive or a Girl Scout executive or YMCA or 4-H or any of these youth organizations. That's what I did. A whole lots to say about all of that. But to say that my entire life was based on Boy Scouts is not a lie. Not at all. Now, fast forward, I hold the organization in some disdain at this point. I have political differences with them, etc. And again, I'm not going to get into that on the podcast, but I am not associated with Boy Scouts now in any way, shape, or form. And because of that, I had always assumed that I could never go back to this camp and see anything. I could never go back and just wander around and say, oh, remember this, remember that, just that little walk down memory lane. And in my research for this, I found out that I can. They've opened it up to the public, and you can rent campground space for $35 a night. And some of the campground space that you can rent is space that I camped on as a kid 50 years ago. Well, let's see, 45 years ago. And that's put me in this weird state because I'm going to New England at the end of June, and I absolutely could make a detour and spend a night at this camp. And I am stuck in this place of like, wow, I would really like to see that stuff again. And also, wow, if I see that stuff again, it's going to supplant many of my memories of how it is. See, right now in my brain, Wild Goose Camp and Adams Pond Camp still exist as they existed in 1984. But if I go back there, they're going to be replaced. I am no longer going to think, oh, Wild Goose, and then see myself there as a 17-year-old. I'm going to see woods that used to be Wild Goose with maybe some new cabins and some other new things, and me as a 57-year-old man wandering around there with none of my friends there, none of the life that used to be there, with hundreds of kids, most of whom I knew, doing things. It's a weird state of being that I'm in right now. And so I haven't made up my mind if I'm going to do it or not. It's a tricky thing, and at my age, where I'm getting more and more retrospective, the question of going back in time to alter the present by changing my memories weighs on me. I'm not sure it's something I want to do. And yet, on the other side, I'm like, I've always been someone who tried to seize opportunities. It would at least give me fodder for a lot of writing, and that's something I really am looking forward to doing. At any rate, thank you for listening to this. It's a little bit unusual for this podcast that is often unusual, but even this time was even a little bit more unusual. I hope it gave you some things to think about, but take some time to appreciate the fact that whenever you're visiting these places, these little restaurants you find that you like, this perfect view with the trees and all that, it's temporary. You are traveling through time, and you've visited at that time, and you can never go back. Well, big thank you to Dave, Get Off the Log, and Nomad Wiki for buying me diesel to help support this podcast. Folks like these make it so that there are no ads on this podcast, which is something everybody appreciates. So thank you so much. If you would like to help support the podcast, please visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And you will have my thanks and the thanks of all of our listeners. By the way, we reached 200,000 downloads a few episodes ago, so there's apparently enough of you listeners out there. Thank you all. Van life news. So, some interesting news this week. Now, actually not talking about vans for the first time, I think, in a long time, but one could impact a lot of people, and that is that Planet Fitness has decided to raise their rates. Now, I heard this massive groan, oh yeah, their $10 a month wonderful plan that would allow people to travel around and shower, mostly, or use internet, or use the exercise equipment in their vans, is going to change. It's going to become $15 a month. That's a 50% increase. That's an extra $60 a year. But before you get too upset about that, there's a few things to know. First off, they haven't changed that rate since 1998. That's before The Matrix came out. That's a long time ago. So we have to give them credit for keeping their price steady there. Also, it's only going to affect new signups. So apparently, if you are currently a classic subscriber, you can maintain at that level. I don't know how they're going to do that, and from reading the article that I will link in the show notes, it seems kind of vague. They don't even have a timeline for when they're going to do this. But they are going to increase prices, and it's something you should be aware of. So, read the article if you are a Planet Fitness person. Another piece of news is that gas prices are kind of being weird right now. One place you can always look at gas trends is at gasprices.aaa.com. I have a link in the show notes at aaa.com, gasprices.aaa.com, and they have trends and they compare to last year and everything. Right now, gas prices are both up and down, and it depends on where you are in the country. It's very strange. Usually at this time of the year, gas prices go up because in the summer, gas goes up because demand goes up because people are taking road trips. Of course, they use that same argument in the winter, too. too. It's like, oh, the winter's here, gas prices are going up because we have to have more additives. There seems to always be an excuse for gas prices to go up. But right now, gas prices are going up and going down. Depends on where you are in the country. And I suspect this reflects refinery capacity more than anything. But in general, prices are just a little bit more than last year, so it's not going to be too bad out there. If you want to go to the part of the country that has the cheapest gas prices, you are going to go to the southern middle of the country. So like Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, that area has the cheapest prices right now. The most expensive places are the West Coast, the Northeast, and Illinois. Yay me. Illinois is ranking pretty high right now. And every place else is somewhere in the middle. But if gas prices is a big deal for you, and if you're getting 10 miles a gallon in your rig, gas prices can be a very big deal, and you're trying to plan where to go this summer, go ahead and take a look at gasprices.aaa.com, especially this year, because, again, it's strange. Some places gas prices have gone down 20 cents recently, and other places they've gone up 20 cents recently. It's very strange. And finally, this is a little bit of an ad, but not really. It's not an ad for the podcast anyway. I am organizing a trip for Skeptoid. Skeptoid Media is a company that does a famous podcast with Brian Dunning and also movies and a bunch of other things. And they've asked me to plan an event, and so I'm working with them to create what's going to be a fairly amazing event, and I just want you guys to be aware of it. At the end of October, we're going to go deep into Death Valley and see a whole bunch of places that only the people who really know Death Valley know. We're going to go to Racetrack Playa and see the Sailing Stones, and if you know anything about Death Valley, that's a fairly hard place to get to. We're going to get you there. And we're also going to go see things like petroglyphs and old mining relics and sand dunes and the hottest place on Earth, the lowest place in the United States, the highest place in the continental United States, a whole bunch of crazy stuff. We're also going to see a lot of places where movies were filmed, like Star Wars and one of the iterations of The Incredible Hulk, etc. Anyway, it's a great trip. It's also a fundraiser for Skeptoid, which is a podcast that I've long supported. If you ever want to know the truth about a phenomenon like UFOs or Bigfoot or some cult or whatever, it's a good chance you can find it on Skeptoid. But if you are interested in learning more about this Death Valley adventure with Skeptoid, I'll have a link in the show notes, or you can visit skeptoid.com, and there's a banner at the top. And it is the Death Valley event. I hope to see you there. I will be there for the entire thing. Tech Talk. Somebody commented that they got a diesel heater, an 8 kilowatt diesel heater, the bigger one, and that they're having trouble with it because it's killing their batteries. Now, the reputation of diesel heaters is that they don't use a lot of battery power, and that is true, especially when you compare it to other forms of heat. If you compare it to any kind of electric heat, yeah, there's no comparison. But even propane heat that has a fan, usually diesel heaters will use less power because of the way they work. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is the startup. Diesel heaters use a lot of power at startup. And so this gentleman has an 8 kilowatt heater, and he's in this cycle that's a problem, and I'm going to explain it. The heaters have thermostats. They're a little strange. If you've not used one of these before, the thermostats are measured in hertz. You set a hertz rate rather than a temperature. And hertz in this case is just how many pulses of fuel the thing gets in a minute. Never mind the technical stuff, but you set the temperature you want, and when the heater gets to that temperature, it shuts off. This is good. This is what you want. You want it to shut off when it stops heating. But if you have a big heater, it's going to reach that temperature fairly quickly and then shut off for a relatively long time. And I think what's happening with the 8 kilowatt heater is that it's reaching temperature and shutting off and cooling down, and then it needs to start up again. So it's using a lot more electricity because it keeps entering its startup cycle. Whereas if you used a smaller diesel heater, like a 5 kilowatt, it wouldn't be cycling that much. It would stay warmed up and wouldn't go through that startup cycle. And that startup cycle, just so you know, is what it's doing. It's heating up the glow plug, and that takes a lot of electricity. So what's the advice here? And the advice is to write size your diesel heater for your build. I have a 5 kilowatt in my 144 Sprinter, and it is more than enough. I can definitely heat that whole thing up. I think an 8 kilowatt in there would have been too much. If I had a much bigger rig and I was using multiple ducts, like let's say I had a separate bedroom and a separate front area with 2 ducts, I might then consider an 8 kilowatt. And if I were in a smaller van, like a minivan, I would definitely go look at 2 kilowatts. These things are more efficient if they're a little bit undersized than oversized, which is unusual. Many things it's exactly the opposite, but for these, you want them to be running more. It's the start and stop cycles that kill your battery and add wear and tear to the device. That's where all the carbon buildup comes from. So, word to the wise, right size your diesel heater. And for most of us, the 5 kilowatt is going to be where you're at. 8 kilowatt only on the biggest rigs, box vans, very large rigs, and 2 kilowatts only on the small vans. That's my advice. Please do more research on that. Just be aware that this is an issue. Product review. Oh, I've used so many of these things that, I don't know, the fact that I keep changing them probably says something, but it's not so much that these things are the problem, it's phones. And what I'm talking about here is a phone holder for the car. This is a very important thing. You want to have a good, easy to use, strong phone holder for your car, because if you don't, it is annoying as heck if you're driving for hours and hours and your phone's always falling off or you can't get to it or whatever. So I am using a new one now because I have an iPhone 14 Pro. Now, iPhone 14 Pros have this thing called MagSafe, and that is that on the back of the phone there's this very strong magnet, and it's also wireless charging. And they make holders now that will just magnetically attach to your phone and charge it. I'm sure there's something similar for Android, but unfortunately all I can really talk about is the iPhone because that's what I have. And so I bought one of these. I actually bought this at Best Buy because I was on the road and I needed it. And it is the Otterbox Performance Car Dash and Windshield Mount for MagSafe Black. This thing is $50, which seems like an awful lot to pay for this type of thing. But it's pretty versatile. This is a suction cup mount that has an extending telescoping arm and then a fairly generous plate that you put your phone on. And it is pretty good. Now when I get in my truck, which is where I have this thing mounted, I just take the phone out of my pocket and boom, put it right on there, and I am good to go. It charges, it holds it there, and it's adjustable so I can put it wherever I want. You can attach it to the windshield. It comes with one of those little plastic discs that you can stick to the dashboard. You can stick it to that. I'm just here to tell you that it works. Now, one caveat here. In my truck, I have wireless CarPlay, so I do not have to attach a cable to the phone to have CarPlay work. And so this works fine. If I was using CarPlay with a cable, I couldn't use the magnetic charging. I mean, I could use both, I guess, but it would be a little strange. Now, you may have figured out that because this thing charges, it has a cable, and that is true. There's a cable that comes out of it that actually feeds into a cigarette lighter plug, and that has a USB port in the back of that. So you will have a cable to run if you use this thing. But you have a cable to run anyway because you want to charge your phone somehow. So I am not thrilled with this. I will say that it works, and for my solution, it was pretty good. I also think it's a great solution for traveling using other vehicles. Like if you're going to rent a car or whatever, throwing one of these in your bag would give you a lot of flexibility, no matter what your situation was. You could always attach it to the windshield or whatever and not have to worry about it so much. What I like about it more than the ones that grab your phone is that all your buttons are free. A lot of those ones that grab your phone interfere with the buttons in my experience, and I think this is better. So if you're looking for another option for mounting your phone in your car, the Otterbox Car Dash Windshield Mount for MagSafe might be a solution. I will say it is definitely strong enough to hold an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and that's about the heaviest iPhone there is, I think. If you do this and you have a case on your phone, make sure you get a MagSafe compatible case. Any old case is going to create a barrier to the magnet working, and you probably won't be able to charge either, so just know that. Tales from the road. I feel like I've already told the tale at this point, but so long ago, I was at Boy Scout camp. This was actually in 1981. And I was at Wild Goose Camp, which is part of the TL Storer Reservation, and Center Barnstead, New Hampshire. And I was fairly new to Boy Scouts. I was just learning the ropes, didn't know what was going on. And some of the staff members offered to do like a field trip, a hike of sorts. And I thought, sure. I was really into hiking. Didn't know what we were going to see, didn't care. Let's go off. And so we hiked to the edge of camp and then just kept walking through the woods. And I don't remember how long it was. I mean, back then it was probably a few miles, which wouldn't have seemed like much to me. Now a few miles seems like a lot, but back then didn't seem like much. And we got to this place that was kind of fascinating to me. No one really explained anything. This is one of my pet peeves, is that people take you places and they don't know anything about them. But we ended up at this mine. Turns out New Hampshire has a lot of mines. I didn't realize this, but New Hampshire, being the granite state, has a lot of granite. And granite is a fairly interesting mineral in that it has stuff in it that's useful. And one of those things is mica, specifically muscovite mica. Now, if you don't remember from school, mica is that very flat mineral that sort of feels like plastic. And you can see through it. It's kind of fascinating. Nowadays, it's used to make your shampoo glitter and stuff like that. But back in the 1700s and the 1800s, it was super useful because glass was expensive and hard to make, and there wasn't any plastic. So having something translucent was very important for things like lamps and windows and ovens and sight glasses and things like that. And that's what they use this mica for. In fact, there's a fairly famous mine in New Hampshire called Ruggles Mine that produced millions and millions of dollars of this stuff, shipping most of it to Europe. It's kind of weird that if you're in Europe and you find a vintage device that has mica in it, that mica probably came from rural New Hampshire. At any rate, we're wandering around this mine, and there's little flecks of mica all over the ground. I mean, the whole place is littered with mica, which answered a question I had, is why our camp had so many pieces of mica around it. And it wasn't that the camp was on that same piece of property and that there was mica coming out of the ground. No, it was kids were going to the mine and taking mica back and then breaking it up for fun and leaving it all over the camp. There was one particular thing at this mine that I thought was really cool, and it was this big flat piece of granite, kind of crooked to the ground, like maybe at 45 degrees. And carved into it was Great Alexander Mine. And I think a date of 1856, but I'm not entirely sure of that. And this is the part that I'm a bit baffled by. I can't find any trace of this mine at all. It's not on the maps. It's not Googleable. I don't know if it exists. I mean, it obviously exists. I've been there, right? Right? Or did I just make all this stuff up in my mind? No, I didn't. I've been there. This mine existed. It was a very large granite outcropping in the woods. It was very tree covered, and there was a hole carved into the hill. And then it looked like at one time you could go in the hole like a normal mine, but it was all filled with rubble and water, so you couldn't. So it was basically just an outside area. But that big Great Alexander rock was there. And it's odd to me that now, with the internet and this being close to a Boy Scout camp, walkable, that nobody has found this or mentioned it or taken a picture of it or anything. I can't find any reference at all to it on the internet. And if I do happen to go back and visit this camp, I don't have enough memory to be able to try to find it. Unless I could find an old map or something, I don't think I could go find it. But that doesn't mean I won't try. Anyway, about the time travel thing, sometimes you can't go back to a place because it doesn't seem to exist anymore at all. You, as so far as you know, are the only person who has any memory of this place existing, and that's the weird state I'm in now. But somewhere in the woods near central Barnstead, New Hampshire, there is an old abandoned mica mine with this really cool sign carving describing what it is, and the ground glitters because there's just so much mica there. a place to visit. Since I'm spending so much time in New Hampshire in my head here, I thought I'd throw in a New Hampshire place to visit that you might not have thought of. Lake Winnipesaukee is a very large very large lake in the middle of the state. It's where On Golden Pond was filmed and some other things. Beautiful lake. I love it. It's just very quintessential New England lake country. And on this lake is a tourist place called Weir's Beach. Not W-H-E-R-E, where, W-E-I-R, where, which means fish trap. Apparently the natives in the area used to trap fish in this area. But that's not the trap we're looking for. It's a tourist trap we're looking for, and it's called FunSpot. FunSpot, when I was a kid, was the largest arcade any of us had ever seen. I mean, we lived in Boston. We would go up to New Hampshire for summer vacations and such, and this arcade blew us away. It was bigger than anything we had in Boston by far. And it turns out it's still there, and it's still one of the world's largest arcades. But now it's mostly a museum. I mean, you can play the games, but they have all those coin-op games and pinball machines from the 80s. They're still there, and you can still go see them. And I think if you are somebody who likes vintage arcade games like, Defender and Gorf and Space Invaders and Asteroids, and I mean, there's so many games we had. They have them there, and you can go in and play. They also have the world's largest pinball machine, which is called Hercules. And they have a bowling alley, which, if I remember correctly, was Candlepin, but I don't know if they've renovated it since I've been there. I haven't been to this place in 40 years or so, but it is still there. And so I will have a link in the show notes. It's just funspotnh.com. If you're ever up in New England and looking for something a little different to do, especially on a really hot day, you want to go somewhere that's air-conditioned, this might be the place to go. But be sure you bring a lot of quarters. Resource recommendation. So it is summertime, and that's construction time. Yeah, any of you folks traveling out there are going to run into construction. Well, in my weekly drives down 55 and I-80, I'm running into construction. I-80's like always under construction, it seems, and it's not going to get any better. With the new bills signed for infrastructure money, we're going to see more and more construction. So what do you do? Well, most of us are using GPS apps that will route us around construction if necessary, but what if you want to do some serious planning and you want to learn where all the construction is ahead of time? There is a way you can do that. The federal government has a website set up that basically shows all the construction in the entire country. Now, it's not as simple as you'd think it would be just like one big map and you could zoom in and see the construction. It's not quite that simple. You have to go state by state, but still, if you are looking to avoid construction this summer, or you're just curious about construction in a certain area, this website will help you out. It is fhwa.gov/traffic info. Just find the link in the show notes. It's so confusing. The word dot is in here. www.fhwa.dot.gov/traffic info. Yeah, link will be in the show notes. But when you get in there, what you'll see is it has basically all the states listed, and then you can go through all these resources and find the construction. It'll tell you all about the construction too, like why they're doing it, what exactly they're doing. In some cases, it'll tell you who's doing it and how much it cost, all this kind of public records info about the contracts and stuff. It might be a good planning tool. So if you are concerned about construction this summer, go ahead and take a look. It might save you a little bit of stress. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to episode 211. I absolutely appreciate you tuning in every week, especially weeks like this. Music, as always, is by Simon Wag, and if you need to get a hold of me, I am jeff@builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And until next time, remember the words of Ted Chiang, author of The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, who said, "Past and future are the same, and we cannot change either. Only know them more fully."